Good morning, everyone. Lots going on as usual, but I'm going to get to a few show notes before we get started. One, yesterday I forgot to upload the first part of the show to Rumble. I did that later and BitChute. Today I'll remember to do both parts to Rumble and BitChute, so apologies about that. The audio version of the show, which you can get at most podcasts, like if you have a podcast listener on your phone, you can just search Canada Poly and it should pop up. And that'll be the full version, not the cut in half version. The audio will be all of the audio from the show all together. So I'm not sure if I can do that with video without having to transform it in a way that's really cumbersome. So I'm trying for light, right, and fast. So that's my strength here. The other part of this is I updated the newsletter signups to better reflect maybe different interests. So I've got the top here is join the mailing list and show updates, or for show updates and weekly newsletter. And then this one is just show updates. So if YouTube cuts me off for whatever reason, I'll use this to communicate with you guys. And you can always go to Canada Poly or Canada Report to talk to me if you want. But if you don't want to do that and sign up for the newsletter, I'll be sending information that will be where you can find me next, etc. But the newsletter will be a weekly newsletter. I've got content and I'm in the middle of fixing my newsletter sending situation. I have technology that I use, but AWS is giving me problems. So, what are you going to do? It's a little tinkering to do today. Okay, let's get into the show. The other thing I wanted to address as well, I was saying yesterday about the fence. I wasn't saying that the fence should stay up. I think it's an abhorrent situation, what's happening. And I think that it should come down. I think it's terrible. But what I was saying is that I think that there were provocateurs in the crowd. I think that they're provoking people. They want people to respond, and if they don't get what they want, they'll figure out a way to get what they want, right? So the Grace Life people weren't even there. So to me, right, my whole point was the Grace Life people had it right. They weren't on site at that point in time, and the protesters who were tearing down the fence, it was short-lived, and I have serious questions about their motivations. That's what I was trying to say. So sorry if I didn't communicate that right. I guess I didn't. There were a lot of comments saying, no, I don't agree with you about that. Okay, we can disagree. That's fine. But I think that I was not coherent in what process was with that. Okay, moving into the news today. Talking about Canadian politics, the Bloc and the Liberals. And I talk about this a lot with regards to our politics. All the Liberals need is a dancing partner to get over the majority, and then that's all they need. The majority of votes in the House of Commons carries the motion, and Bob's your uncle, right? And sorry about your luck. That's happening, and nothing you can do about it, right? Because our government system has that. So if the NDP won't play ball, well, you've got the Bloc. No problems, right? Let's just make a deal. Right? So huge, says Tracy William. Liberals shut down Defense Committee probe into sexual misconduct in the CAF. The committee was hearing damning testimony about the government's mishandling, not a feminist government. So there's a lot of people trying to take Trudeau to task for not being a feminist government. I think that it's funny that they're giving the Bloc a pass on this, right? Like, is this a confidence issue for the government? A government that says they're a feminist government, feminism first, but this was 2018, and there was sexual allegations coming out, and they were busy burying Mark Norman. Very interesting. The Bloc gets a pass for supporting the Liberals, right? With the support of the Bloc, the Liberals have passed the motion to shut down the Defense Committee probe into sexual misconduct in the Canadian military. In 2018, here is Justin Trudeau. Trudeau says zero tolerance on misconduct towards women applies to him as well. That's January 31st, 2018. In a CBC radio interview, the PM says recent high-profile cases aren't about compliments taken the wrong way. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says women who come forward with complaints of sexual assault and harassment must be supported and believed. So, and now this isn't even about what happened with Vance. Like, we're far away from that. What's happening now is we're talking about the government's mishandling of the allegation, right? So the allegation is separate and apart from the issue that's at hand, which is interesting. And the issue at hand is when you heard about this and you were saying that there's zero tolerance, right? 2018, you heard about this in 2018. Then how can you have any credibility? But I mean, that's a constant question with these Liberals, isn't it? Isn't it? Oh, it is. Lockdowns. We're going to talk about school in the Rumble part of the show, in the second part of the show, because I want to show you some stats that YouTube might not like so much. And I want to tell you the whole story and not water it down. And I have that ability. So wonderful. If you want to join me over in Rumble, do that. That'll be great. I'll tell you about that. The school closures in Ontario, they've decided to close the schools, and they're using some data. The data is suspect, and I'm wondering about that. So check it out on the second half of the show. But here is what is happening with police and bylaw officers around the country. This is concerning. Bylaw issues 10 charges for illegal private gatherings, 16 for provincial COVID violations over the weekend. Wow, right? Like there's lots of fines. There's lots of costs to these new COVID rules, and they're not laws. They're not laws. They're health orders, right? So this is punishing. Now, remember last year what I was talking about, they're phasing this in. This is the education phase. There's not going to be fines yet. It's not going to be such a big deal yet. And now we're in the the people who aren't quite cops, but now they've got just as much power, right? Show me your ID, please. Where do you live? Okay, well, why are you here with this other person who doesn't live with you, right? Don't you know there's an at-home order? Blah, 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 blah. So the power that they're wielding is much further beyond what they used to wield with bylaw services, right? So it's not great. It's not great to see what our country is dissolving into, right? There's rhetoric around that later on in the show as well. Here's Montreal police in riot gear picking off lone 8 p.m. curfew protesters in downtown Montreal, right? So they're being arrested for being out after 8 o'clock, right? You see the running cops? Wild. Isn't that something? Isn't that something terrifying? I think it's very, very scary. Here is Maxime Bernier. He's talking about Grace Life as well. I'll let him have his piece. I think it's a worthwhile video. This is the only federal leader that I've seen who's talking about this kind of stuff. Somebody was asking me if I am a PPC candidate. The PPC cutoff was at the end of March 26th, and I did not submit my paperwork for that. So sorry to announce that, but I have not submitted my paperwork for the next federal election. If it's a snap election or whatever, I haven't done that. But that doesn't necessarily mean I don't support the PPC. It means I have some serious questions. But here's Maxime Bernier, and I think it's worth listening to him. Here we go.
Hi everyone, I'm standing on the grounds of the Grace Life Church near Edmonton, whose pastor spent 35 days in jail for violating lockdown's rules. As you can see, the church was barricaded by provincial authorities in Alberta. Unfortunately, I could not be here yesterday with many protesters came to show their support. I was in Vancouver attending a freedom rally and other private events. I was supposed to be back in Montreal today, but I decided to extend my trip to express my moral support for Albertans fighting against unfair and unconstitutional lockdowns. I'm here right now to stand with the congregation of Grace Life Church and Pastor James Coates, as with all Canadians who want our governments to respect the Charter of Rights, to respect our freedom of worship, assembly. We must continue to stand together against this increasingly authoritarian police state. Thank you. Stay strong and free.
Let me explain my thought process. First, he's the only federal leader who's talking about a police state. He's talking about it openly and clearly. Second, when I ran in 2019 for the PPC, I had a very clear goal. I won before the election happened because my goal in running for that election was to get Mr. Bernier into the debates. The debate was an absolute travesty. The election was a farce. And watching the 2020 election in the United States made me realize that if they can do that, find those Biden votes at 2 a.m. in the morning to the President of the United States in an election as important as that one, openly for the entire world to see, do I really want to run? Do I really want to use and spend my time in that way? Because that means it's a losing game. That means, and I knew that I wasn't going to win when I went into run in 2019. The idea wasn't to win. The idea was to get Mr. Bernier into the debates, which I did. Success, right? Wonderful. But this time, like, it's a lot of work to run an election. It's a lot of work to run an election campaign. It's a lot of work to run a campaign office. It's a lot of work to do that. I have a job. I have a show that I do every day. There's a lot to do. And when you put it through the lens of, is it worth the battle that you have to fight? And if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. I'm going to fight the battles that need to be fought. I'm going to make sure that I get into the debates. I'm going to make sure that I have a room at the table to speak, right? If there is a purpose to doing that. Is federally spending my time doing that the most important thing I had to ask myself? And the answer that I came to the conclusion of is not this time, not right now. And there's a lot to do. I'm not saying I don't want to do anything. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's a lot to do. I'm saying that education is a provincial responsibility, and right now we're failing our kids. I'm saying that there's so much to do that we need to be looking at how we can do the most good and how I can do the most good. So me not running for PPC is not necessarily not endorsing the PPC. I have serious questions. I really do. And I'm sorry that I have serious questions, but that's just who I am. I'm not somebody who will do something because somebody told me to do it. That's not me at all. So, and I don't want to rain on Bernier's announcement and what he's talking about here. I just wanted to make sure that my position on things is clear, or as clear as I can make it, right? Like as clear as it is in my head. So I hope that makes sense to you. But this is a wild and crazy world, and who knows what will happen between now and the next federal election, the next provincial election. I don't know. I'm hopeful for something good. I really am hopeful for something good. But I'll continue doing my show, and well, let's get back into it, shall we? Okay, moving on. Oops, there we go. Next one. Could, might, possibly, suggest, model, project, as many as, potentially. These are words of panic and speculation that mean nothing. Yet they have kept our society terrorized for 14 months. We must look beyond them. Yeah. Bernier among demonstrators calling for Alberta to end COVID-19 public health restrictions. I haven't seen O'Toole doing that. I haven't seen Elizabeth May doing that. I haven't seen Justin Trudeau saying anything to the premiers about lockdowns being maybe bad for kids, right? Like, what happened to the Bell mental health day? I can't remember what it is, but anyway, every day when all the government people say, yeah, this year our mental health can be better, they seem to ignore it when it's terrible, when our stats show that our kids are suffering and their actions are impacting things, right? Like, where are they now when it really matters? It's very interesting situation, right? Very interesting indeed. So anyway, Bernier again is the only federal leader on the world stage, or on the Canadian stage, federal stage, who is talking with people and taking pictures without a mask. How something so unremarkable can become remarkable, right? Like just having pictures with people without a mask in 2021, and this is something that is notable, right? And wow, very interesting, very interesting. This sort of protest first began during the 2012 Quebec student protests. Students would go on the streets banging on pots and pans every night. Word on social media is that people in Quebec are going to bring back this form of protest against the 8 p.m. curfew. So here is an idea to protest in your neighborhood and to show that you're not happy with what's going on, and to minimize your potential risk to exposure to something like being arrested by the Montreal police. But this is what they're doing. They're out banging pots and pans. Here we go. That's a lot of pots and pans, right? People are upset. I think people are upset. But in Newfoundland, we're looking at elections. We're talking about elections. In Newfoundland, they just had an election, and the NDP are challenging the election results, alleging voting irregularities. There's a bunch of crazy stuff that happened. They suspended in-person voting for all sorts of COVID reasons. And I talked about it at the time when it happened, and I said, this is going to be a really big problem. Like, it's going to be a really big problem because remember when I said they were using the Faith Goldie mayoral race to kind of test run things, like test how far they could go with removing advertising from a candidate they didn't like, despite the election rules that say you can't do that, and testing other suppression methods, etc. The racist, like painting somebody as racist, tying Faith Goldie with the white supremacist thing because she read those things on that podcast that one time, which when you look at the context of the podcast, it's a very different story than what the media tells. But regardless, they ran that template and then they did it nationally, and so I think this is a similar thing when they're going to use that template nationally because it worked out, and then you're already like you're in litigation to keep your spot, and it's not really, once you've started governing, pulling somebody from, I mean, it happened in Burma, right? Like the coup in Burma, they pulled that president out and said this wasn't legitimate and whatever, but it's caused nothing but civil unrest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's very difficult to overturn an election once the other party has taken over. And I mean, it's not better for Canada. It's not better provincially. It's not better federally to have question marks around the voting process. And are there going to be question marks? Well, yeah, with mail-in ballots and all sorts of the stuff that they want to do, like the tactics they used in the Newfoundland election were similar to what they're proposing to roll out nationally for the next federal. So again, it's very, very, very concerning, and that's mail-in balloting, having multiple days for voting, like 3 days instead of 1 day, to make sure you can socially distance and all sorts of stuff. It's a lot of regulations that don't end up being beneficial for democracy, and that's a very big problem. And it doesn't seem to be a problem that anybody's really interested in addressing at all. So that's also a problem. But what are you going to do, right? Okay, let's get into governance. Justin Trudeau says, when we present our budget next week, we outline the next steps in our recovery from this pandemic and how we're going to build back better. This afternoon, I spoke about this with Yves Francois Blanchette, and tomorrow I'll also be reaching out to the NDP and the Green Party leaders. I mean, I wonder who he forgot to mention there. The Bloc and the NDP and the Greens. It's just like there's a group of people who he's just not acknowledging exist. Okay? Justin Trudeau, yes, Prime Minister. Here is Mr. Poilievre talking about the gatekeeper economy. He gives an example of the government's business killing policies. And this is impactful and important because when you kill businesses, it doesn't help the economy. But I mean, who's going to tell the Trudeau Liberals that? Certainly not Chrystia Freeland. She is a stakeholder capitalist, right? Which is not what you think it is. Okay, here's Pierre Poilievre.
Positive at all. In fact, this government personifies the gatekeeper economy. The very first decision it made on taking office was to veto the privately funded expansion of the Toronto Downtown Island Airport. An expansion which would have allowed Porter Airlines, a Canadian company, to buy $2 billion of Bombardier jets and land them there, creating jobs for another Canadian company, but also reducing traffic by landing business people in the business district rather than having to travel between Pearson and downtown, adding to pollution and delay and killing jobs. And in this case, who were the gatekeepers? Well, of course, the competitor airlines that didn't want to add convenience to this to the customers that would go to the downtown airport if this were approved, and of course, the wealthy waterfront condo owners, almost all of them millionaires, and by virtue of their wealth, having an excessive amount of political power. And so they killed all the opportunity for the people who would have worked on that project, and the customers who would have saved time, and the people who now have to sit on the roadways between a distant airport and a downtown destination. Not far from there are some more gatekeepers in a place called Cabbage.
So government is killing opportunity. Government is killing even environmental impact, like positive environmental impact, because they're forcing people to land 40-minute drive away from where their destination is when they could have invested in this or just allowed this thing to go ahead. Nope, can't do that. But we've got to let the sewage flow into the St. Lawrence. Right, Minister McKenna? Laurie Goldstein, speaking of the environment, says Environment Canada moves goalposts in report on greenhouse gas emissions. In new report, it says emissions dropped 9 million tons annually from 739 million tons in 2005 to 730 million tons in 2019. Last year, it put 2005 emissions at 730 million tons, meaning no drop at all. This nonsense goes on all the time in Canada's reporting of greenhouse gas emissions. This is the new report putting 2005 emissions at 739 million tons, and here's last year's report putting them at 730 million tons. So Canada's just making up statistics, whatever. Like, it's cool, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Don't look at last year. This is the updated science, okay? And if we say it's science, then you can't deny it. Otherwise, you'll be a science denier. You're probably an anti-masker too. I mean, you know what we say about anti-maskers, right? Apparently, if the feds want to record a drop in emissions in 2019 compared to 2005, they retroactively raise the amount of the emissions in 2005 by 9 million tons this year, as opposed to last year's report, which indicates no decrease in emissions in 2019 compared to 2005. Reports saying emissions increased 1 million tons between 2018 and 2019 to 730 million tons are based on last year's report that put 2018 emissions at 729 million tons. This year's report says 2018's emissions were 728 million tons, meaning they increased 2 million tons. Other than all that, this year's report makes perfect sense and is totally believable. Wink. Sure it is, right? Sure, why not? Why not? City of Calgary employee charged nearly $95,000 in overtime. A document obtained by CBC News shows a City of Calgary employee worked nearly 714 hours of overtime during the pandemic last year, charging the city $94,818. That work, which occurred from June to October 2020, was done by the manager in the office of the councillors. The overtime was recorded after she fired 3 city council members or city employees in the same office. They were terminated because there wasn't enough work for them to do as the pandemic forced councillors to work primarily from home. CBC News isn't naming the woman because her overtime was approved and she's been on sick leave since last fall. The job of approving such expenditures for staff in that office belonged to the chair of the coordinating committee of the councillor's office, CCCO. That was then Councillor Ray Jones. Ray Jones. He resigned his seat last October due to health reasons. He estimated it might have been, so when reached by the CBC News, Jones said that he recalls authorizing some of the office managers' overtime last year. He estimated it might have been 50 to 60 hours over several months. That is significantly less than what the city says was authorized by him. When asked if the total he approved was nearly $95,000, Jones says, "I'm shocked at that dollar figure. I don't remember signing for that." The overtime bill raises a lot of questions for the former councillor. "First off, I want to know who signed it," said Jones. "I can't believe I signed that." But there's no real way to hold anybody accountable. Like, then she gets involved. He's like, "Well, we've got lots of hard questions." Yeah? Great. So do we as a taxpayer, right? So do we. Aaron O'Toole's walking around trying to find some relevance. He is failing. He says, "Canada can't afford another slow and incompetent Liberal response. We need to learn from that and prepare for the future." O'Toole promises a public inquiry into Liberal government's pandemic response if elected. Yes, that's what we need. We need people to publicly inquire. We need to spend more taxpayer dollars to have people look at the Liberals' failed response. I think there's probably a better use of money. Let's stop the bleeding first. Let's stop. I think that it's notable that O'Toole is talking about calling for public inquiries onto a specific thing like pandemic response, but he's not calling for any kind of restoring of our personal liberties and rights and freedoms. He's not talking about the Canadian Charter of Rights. He's not talking about people being locked in their homes, lockdowns being ineffective. He's not talking about any of that. He's not talking about the power of the medical officer of health across the provinces, about the fact that they've usurped the power of lawmaking for a year, right? Like, he's not talking about any of that. And maybe he should be talking about things like that, right? Maybe he should be talking about the things that are going to resonate with the public rather than talking about a public inquiry for the Liberals government. See, the problem with the public inquiry is the Liberals are going to say there's an emergency. See all these newspaper articles that say there's an emergency? There's an emergency. And the reason that we did all of those things that you want to look into is because of the emergency. And then a judge is going to go, "Yep, emergency," and that's it. That's all that's going to happen. It's It's a BS. It's a distraction. It's garbage. Like it doesn't move the needle on anything. Oh no, a public inquiry. The bureaucrats are going to look into it and they're going to say, you know what? It was an emergency. And then the CBC will probably sue, or the National Post will probably sue the Conservatives for using the National Post headline in their attack ad, right? How dare they attack the Liberals for daring to respond to an emergency? Like that. This is the play. It's garbage. And it means the rhetoric is so weak. It's like a wet spaghetti noodle, right? Get them with it. Rah! Right? Like... Miranda says, to all the morons, especially in Ontario, cheering for a national pharmacare program. This is a Liberal Party plank now. They want national pharmacare to steal the NDP party. I don't know. I'm not sure why. The NDP party are backbenchers that the Liberals don't have to be accountable to, but they vote with them all the time anyway, right? And if not, they just go to the Bloc, who are also backbenchers of the current Liberals. But the point is, the pharmacare program is a bad idea, and this comparison is drawn. The LCBO, which is the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, is the world's largest purchaser of alcoholic beverages. Now compare its prices to a corner store in Alberta or Quebec. You see where I'm going with this? If you're watching in Alberta, a small little Mickey of vodka is $15 in Ontario. Just to give you an idea, and if it's in Quebec, that doesn't change the price of the vodka in Ontario. A 70 ouncer, the big one. What? No, it's not 70 ounces. Oh, I don't know the volume anymore. 1.2 liter, I guess. That's $70. So it's very expensive, and that's a lot of taxes, right? And a lot of I don't know where the money goes. Infrastructure, right? Like they've got lots of stores, right? Anyway. Safety Canada recommends a ban on criminal background checks as discriminatory. A criminal record is one of the main reasons why securing employment after incarceration can be elusive. Yeah, well, I mean, in what industries are you looking at banning the criminal backgrounds check? Like, totally? What about, working with kids and stuff? There's reason for criminal background checks, right? There's a reason for that, for vulnerable populations. The Liberal government is Canada's biggest problem, says Diane Francis. This is an opinion piece. And Canada is a ship of state with no one at the helm who understands how a country operates, how to steer it, where it should head, or what it should avoid. Yeah, that's accurate. That's an accurate statement there. Hold on, I'll get my tabs loaded. The government is going to be bailing out the airlines. Mercedes Stevenson says Global News can confirm that the Liberal government will be announcing a financial relief package tonight for Air Canada. I'm hearing the package will not be straight up money, but will reflect a focus on consumers, customers, and taxpayers too. Yay, so you can not fly anywhere. That seems weird. Air Canada signs $5.9 billion government aid package, agrees to buy Airbus Boeing jets. Yeah, sure, we'll buy them, I guess. France just banned domestic flights between cities 2.5 hours away by train. So if you can get to a city from your destination, from where you are to your destination in 2.5 hours, then you can't fly there. There's no option now in France. That's banned, according to this. So interesting situation. Gerald Butts really liked this plan. He thought that plan was great. And he said you'll probably see that in places with better rail. So that's interesting. Here's a China story before we cut the show off and head over to Rumble. But Ezra says, this is pretty incredible. This is a Canadian senator appointed by Justin Trudeau, but he is tweeting in Chinese a threat to Canada and the 2 Canadian hostages held by the Chinese Communist Party. So so the tweet says, unless the British Columbia High Court decides to release Ms. Meng, the final settlement of the case will be political. Everything that happened before this was just a long tug of war. This inference also applies to the detention cases of Michael Spaffer and Michael Korvig. If both parties do not recognize the legitimacy of each other's judicial system and do not allow both parties to find a solution under their own systems, it will not be possible to finally solve the problem. That's a problem. That's difficult. That's a little conundrum, right? And Senator Leo Housakis is responding to the Halifax Security Forum over getting in trouble over the proposed Taiwanese award. And he says, we really have to start asking tough questions about what's truly behind Trudeau's relationship with Beijing. Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. Very difficult questions abound, and it's problematic when there is, hard questions to be answered, right? Very interesting. What are we going to do as a country in light of this information, right? And well, that's up to Trudeau and his group to set the direction. But unfortunately, no, not that one. This one. The Liberal government is Canada's biggest problem. So, right? What are we going to do? Maybe that's going to be my title for the show today. All right. Well, I'm going to head over to Rumble and finish off the show. If you want to join me there, that would be wonderful. If not, that's fine. Check me out at CanadaPoly.com, CanadaReport.co, and SpeakingMoistly.co. And thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Ooh, I could do this. Yeah.